Jack stood at the airport terminal, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, watching as the crowd around him buzzed with excitement. It had been 3 long years since he had walked on American soil. The cheers, the flags, the smiles, everything felt surreal. After years of chaos, the peace of home was almost too much to process. He spotted his family in the distance. His mother was waving, her eyes filled with tears, while his father stood tall, trying to maintain his composure. Jack's younger brother, Ryan, jumped up and down with excitement, shouting, "He's back! He's back!" As Jack walked toward them, the crowd parted. Strangers smiled at him, some clapped, and a few even saluted. "Welcome home, soldier," one man said as he passed by. Jack nodded in response, but inside, a mix of emotions stirred. Pride, yes, but also discomfort. The war had changed him in ways that these people would never understand. When he reached his family, his mother pulled him into a tight embrace, her tears soaking into his uniform. His father clapped him on the back. "Proud of you, son," he said in a voice thick with emotion. Jack forced a smile, though the weight of their pride was heavy on his chest. He knew they meant well, but the transition from war to peace wasn't as simple as they thought. That night, after the welcome home party his family had thrown, Jack sat alone in his childhood bedroom, staring at the walls covered in old posters and high school memorabilia. It felt strange to be back in this place, where life had once seemed so simple. Outside, the world saw him as a hero, a symbol of courage and sacrifice. But inside, he felt like a stranger in his own skin. The next few weeks were a blur of ceremonies, parades, and interviews. The town had always been patriotic, and Jack's return was seen as a point of pride. The mayor invited him to a town hall meeting, where he was presented with a medal for his service. At the local diner, people would stop him to thank him, offering to buy his meals, patting him on the back with words of admiration. But with each, "Thank you," and "We're proud of you," Jack felt more disconnected. They didn't know what it was like: the sleepless nights, the deafening sound of gunfire, the faces of fallen comrades that haunted his dreams. How could they understand when all they saw was the uniform, not the man underneath? One afternoon, Jack walked through the town square, his thoughts racing. The sun was shining, kids were playing, and the world seemed so normal. But Jack's mind was elsewhere, still trapped in the desert heat, in the chaos of war. He sat down on a bench, running a hand through his hair. "Jack?" He looked up to see Emily, a girl he had known from high school. She smiled at him, though her eyes were cautious, like she didn't know what to expect. "Hey, Emily," Jack said, trying to muster some enthusiasm. He hadn't seen her in years, but back in high school, they had been close. She had written to him a few times while he was overseas, but they had lost touch after a while. "Welcome back," she said, sitting down beside him. "It's good to see you." "Thanks," Jack replied, his voice tight. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the world go by. "Everything must feel different," Emily said softly, glancing at him. "I mean, coming back after everything." Jack sighed, relieved that someone had finally acknowledged it. "Yeah," he said, staring at the ground. "Different doesn't even begin to cover it." Emily nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I can't imagine what you've been through." Jack appreciated her honesty. Most people didn't even try to imagine. They just assumed everything would go back to normal for him. But how could it? The war had left its mark on him in ways that weren't visible to the outside world. They talked for a while, about high school memories, about the war, about what life was like now. For the first time since he had returned, Jack felt a little lighter, like he wasn't carrying everything on his own. Over the next few weeks, Jack began to settle into a new routine. He found a job at the local hardware store, where the work was steady and uncomplicated. His boss, Mr. Stevens, was an old family friend who treated Jack with respect but didn't make a big deal out of his military service. It was a relief to just be another guy working a job, without the constant reminders of war. But the nightmares didn't stop. Every night, Jack would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart racing, the sounds of explosions ringing in his ears. The memories of the battlefield were always there, lurking in the corners of his mind, waiting to pounce when he least expected it. One night, after waking from another nightmare, Jack decided he couldn't do this alone anymore. The weight of his experiences was too much to carry on his own. He needed help. The next morning, he made an appointment with a therapist. It wasn't easy. Talking about what he had been through was the last thing he wanted to do, but he knew it was the only way forward. His therapist, Dr. Matthews, was patient and understanding, and little by little, Jack began to open up about the things that haunted him. As the months passed, Jack started to feel a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. The nightmares didn't disappear entirely, but they became less frequent. He found comfort in his routine at the hardware store, in his talks with Dr. Matthews, and in his growing friendship with Emily, who had become a constant presence in his life. One day, as Jack walked through town, he realized that the weight on his chest had lifted, just a little. The admiration and pride from the townspeople still felt overwhelming at times, but now he understood that it came from a place of gratitude, not expectation. They didn't see the whole picture, but that was okay. They didn't need to. What mattered was that Jack was finding his way back to himself. As time went on, Jack learned to embrace both parts of himself, the soldier who had fought and survived, and the man who was still learning how to live in peace. The journey wasn't easy, but with each passing day, Jack felt a little more like the person he had been before the war, and a little more like the person he was meant to become.